welcome to Thursday's episode of the Literary Lutheran Reads a Book of Concord. Today we continue to go through Article 24, the Mass, the use of the sacrament and of the sacrifice. Such a use of the sacrament, in which faith enlivens terrified hearts, is a service of the New Testament. That is because the New Testament requires spiritual inclinations, making dead and alive. Christ instituted the sacrament for this use, since he commanded the disciples to do this in remembrance of him. Remembering Christ is not the useless celebration of a show. It is not something set up for the sake of example, as the memory of Hercules or Ulysses is celebrated in tragedies. Rather, it is remembering Christ's benefits and receiving them through faith to be enlivened by them. So Psalm 111, verses 4 to 5 says, "He has caused his wondrous works to be remembered. The Lord is gracious and merciful. He provides food for those who fear him." The sacrament illustrates that God's will and mercy should be discerned in the ceremony. Faith that grasps mercy enlivens. This is the chief use of the sacrament. It is clear who are fit for the sacrament, namely terrified consciences, and how they should use it. The sacrifice is also added, for there are several reasons with one purpose. After a conscience encouraged through faith has determined from what terrors it is freed, it fervently gives thanks for Christ's benefit and passion. It also uses the ceremony itself to God's praise to show its gratitude by this obedience. It declares that it holds God's gift in high esteem. So the ceremony becomes a sacrifice of praise. The Fathers certainly speak of a twofold effect: the comfort of consciences and thanksgiving or praise. The former of these effects has to do with the nature of the sacrament. The latter has to do with the sacrifice. Ambrose says about comfort, "Go to him and be absolved, because he is the forgiveness of sins. Do you ask who he is? Hear him when he says, 'I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me shall not hunger, and whoever believes in me shall never thirst.'" John chapter 6, verse 35. This passage declares that the forgiveness of sins is offered in the sacrament. It also declares that this should be received through faith. Countless references with this meaning are found in the Fathers, all of which the adversaries pervert to the outward act, and to a work applied to others. Yet the Fathers clearly require faith and speak of the comfort belonging to everyone and not of the application. Besides these, expressions are also found about thanksgiving. One beautiful expression by Cyprian is about those communing in a godly way. Piety, in thinking in bestower of such abundant blessing, makes a distinction between what has been given and what has been forgiven. This means piety regards both what has been given and what has been forgiven, that is, it compares the greatness of God's blessings and the greatness of our evils, sin and death, with each other and gives thanks and so on. In this way, the term Eucharist arose in the Church. Certainly the ceremony itself, the giving of thanks by the outward act, does not apply to others. It does not merit the forgiveness of sins for others and free souls of the dead. These opinions conflict with the righteousness of faith. Without faith, a ceremony cannot benefit either the one performing it or others. The term Mass. The adversaries also refer us to linguistics. They get arguments from the names of the Mass, which do not require a long discussion. For even though the Mass is called a sacrifice, it does not make sense that it must give grace by the outward act, or, when applied to others, merits the forgiveness of sins for them. Liturgia, they say, means a sacrifice, and the Greeks will call the Mass liturgy. Why did they leave out here the old name synaxis, which shows that the Mass used to be the communion of many? Let us discuss the word liturgy. This word does not properly mean a sacrifice, but rather the public ministry. Liturgy agrees well with our belief that one minister who consecrates gives the Lord's body and blood to the rest of the people, just as one minister who preaches offers the gospel to the people. As Paul says, this is how one should regard us, as servants of Christ and stewards of the mysteries of God. 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 1. That is, of the gospel and the sacraments. And We are ambassadors for Christ, God making his appeal through us. We implore you on behalf of Christ to be reconciled to God. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 20. So the term liturgia agrees well with the ministry, for it is an old word ordinarily used in public civil administrations. To the Greeks it meant public burdens such as tribute, the expense of equipping a fleet, or similar things. For Leptines, the oration of Demosthenes speaks about such things, discussing at length public duties and exemptions. He will say that some unworthy men, having found an exemption, have withdrawn from public burdens. And so they spoke in the time of the Romans, as a reply of Pertinax, on the law of exemption shows, even though the number of children does not liberate parents from all public burdens. And the contemporary commentary on Demosthenes states that liturgia is a kind of tribute, the expense of the games, the expense of equipping vessels, of attending to the gymnasia, and similar public offices. In 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 12, Paul uses it for a collection. Taking a collection not only supplies those things that the saints lack, but also causes them to give more thanks abundantly to God. In Philippians chapter 2, verse 25, he calls Epaphroditus a minister to my need, where certainly a sacrificer cannot be understood. Further references are not needed, since examples are understandable for those reading the Greek writers, in whom liturgia is used for public civil burdens or ministries. Because of the pair of vowels, grammarians do not get this term from light, which means prayers, but from public goods, which they call lita, so that liturgio means I pay attention to or I administer public goods. This has been the Literary Lutheran Reads the Book of Concord, and I wish you a blessed day.